Today's episode, we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Kelly Bay out of New York. So Dr. Bay, she received her Doctor of Chiropractic, her Master's in Human Nutrition, and a Bachelor of Science in General Studies, Natural Sciences, Mathematics. A lot of degrees here, Dr. Bay, all from the University of Bridgeport. She has additional certifications in clinical as a clinical nutrition specialist and certified dietitian nutritionist. Dr. Bay has worked with various HIV nonprofit organizations, providing functional protocols for HIV patients with various health issues such as diabetes, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And in fact, Dr. Bay received an award for innovative functional medicine approaches aimed at improving the health status of HIV individuals. And I'm sure we'll be asking her about that. But first of all, welcome to Nutritional Nation, Dr. Bay.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about the HIV here in a little bit, but let's start with our listeners and let's just talk just some general nutrition and it's just overall health and how nutrition plays a role and how poor nutrition can really lead to disease processes. Can you just bring our listeners up to speed on just how nutrition plays that critical role in our overall health?
Sure. I actually think that nutrition is kind of the key to most chronic illnesses that we're experiencing today. I think because it's not a really well-known subject, a lot of people just think it's important to eat healthy and yeah, sure, that's great. You want to maintain a great weight, but they don't really understand the integral part that nutrition plays in so many processes in your body. I like to give the neurotransmitter example. So everyone knows about serotonin. It's the happy hormone. You know, serotonin reuptake inhibitors are one of the most popular pharmaceuticals given by health professionals. And yet we don't really think about where serotonin comes from. And it's really made from the proteins that you eat in your food. And you need very specific vitamins and minerals to transform that protein into the usable hormone serotonin. And when you don't have enough of those nutrients, you're not going to be very good at making it. So I think it's really interesting that nutritional status isn't really checked for something when people are having symptoms of depression or anxiety or even bowel changes, which serotonin is also involved in. Because it can significantly impact, serotonin synthesis. And another thing to consider is, gut health. 80 to 90% of your serotonin is actually made in your gut. So if you have any kind of chronic gut problem, you're going to have difficulty synthesizing serotonin just because of the inflammatory process. And then on top of that, if you're not eating a nutrient-dense diet or taking the supplements you need, you may not have the cofactors, the B vitamins, and the minerals that are needed to even make the serotonin. So nutrition is so integral for every function in your body that it can really impact things and lead to chronic disease. So I think it's a really important thing. And I think the diabetes example is also great because, it's how you eat can directly cause insulin resistance and completely change your physiology to the point where you're sick. So for a lot of these diseases, I believe that nutrition is the approach that's been ignored for quite some time.
Absolutely, and I agree. And since we talk about genetics and our DNA on this show, let's get specific. Let's talk about how these nutrients really interact with our DNA. How does that process work, and why is that important?
That is such an important topic, and I'm really glad you brought it up. It's trendy right now too. It's the idea of epigenetic expression. So your DNA, you have DNA, it's there, but the epigenetic idea is kind of more like how it's being expressed. And you can influence phenotype expression through just environmental factors. So if you're exposed to heavy metals, toxic chemicals, smog, bad foods that cause inflammation, you don't sleep enough, these can all impact your epigenetic expression and can turn on certain genes or turn off certain genes. And depending on what you're exposed to, it can benefit you or it can cause problems. So like eating a very antioxidant rich diet would, hopefully encourage, some epigenetic expression that would benefit your body, your life. Whereas if, you're exposed to chemicals in your workplace, you only sleep 4 hours a day and you eat French fries for every meal and bacon, you might have some problems because of how you're.
For you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so I really love the topic of epigenetics because I want people to understand the power that they have over their body. And just everyday choices really can influence things. And it's not about being perfect, but it's about being aware of the choices that you have and the impact that you can actually have on your cancer risk or your risk of diabetes or whatever it may be, just by understanding some basic epigenetics.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they think that, well, my DNA is who I am, and it is what it is. It's been passed down by my ancestors, and there's not much I can do about it. So if I'm predisposed to some disease or some condition, that there's not much I can do about it. But what you're saying is, we do have the power. We do have some power over that.
Yes, you're not your genes. I talk about that so often because I think people do feel really discouraged sometimes. They're like, well, everyone in my family has had breast cancer. And it's like, you are not your genes. You have control over your risk factors, and you may have a genetic predisposition, but you also have control over, the kind of expression that your genes may have on your disease risk. So it's a powerful thing, and I think it's important to kind of educate people on because it gives some of that control back.
No, and that is exciting stuff, and that should be a lot of good news for our listeners. That, as you said, you are not your genes. You do have power over that, and that's awesome. Now you're in a clinical setting. You see a lot of patients. You help a lot of people there. Talk a little bit about some of the testing that you do there to really determine what really what the prognosis is and what the nutritional needs of that person should be. Can you describe that for us?
So I use a lot of functional testing to kind of get to the bottom of how the physiology is really acting. And I do like to utilize genetic testing, but I've really gotten kind of away from it unless it's absolutely necessary, because I find that getting functional testing that shows me how the physiology is really behaving will show me patterns that will tell me like, okay, this person probably has MTHFR, they need methylated B vitamins because, oh, look, their homocysteine is really high. And, oh, wait, it's really weird. They have high blood levels of B12 because they can't transform it. So you get these pictures in a much more comprehensive fashion if you run functional testing that actually looks at what your body's doing. And it will show you patterns that show you might be getting a lot of this vitamin, but it's not the form you need because, look, it's not getting into your cells. So I really I love Genova. They're a great lab. They do a lot of comprehensive tests. I think my favorite panel is like the ion with 40 amino acids because it just covers literally everything that could be going on. And I do find that frequently people with chronic fatigue syndrome or other chronic diseases, it's a lot of times there are these big holes in their nutrition, or even weight loss. I've seen a lot of weight loss patients that's like, oh, they don't have any carnitine. Well, you can't burn fat without the carnitine shuttle. So if you don't have enough carnitine, yeah, of course you're not losing weight. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a metabolic problem. So they're not standard tests and they're not covered by insurance most of the time, but they really look at states of physiology, and you can really see what moment in time your body is in as far as like disease progress, or even if you have no disease, you just have these big deficiencies that are starting to create symptoms that no one else can figure out. So that's the kind of testing that I usually go for.
And let's and so in your introduction, I talked about you won an award doing a lot with the HIV community. and really helping them. And I think most people, you know, we don't hear a lot about HIV that much in the news anymore. It's you know, back in the 80s and 90s, you know, it was a pretty intense topic. And I know there's been some advancement as far as some drug treatments, but you've shown success with nutrition and helping folks who have tested HIV positive, but also that, you know, basically have a weakened immune system. So something else has also cropped up, and as far as their conditions inside their body. And obviously you've had some success. So, you know, what are you doing? What's you know, this sounds exciting that there's hope for people with weakened immune systems with nutrition. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to. So the HIV research I've done and work I've done is really interesting, because I've basically, when you have a chronic viral infection, you know, it's with the retroviruses specifically, not only do we have amazing therapies now, the antiretroviral drugs allow these patients to live really long, full lives, but something to be considered is it also causes drug-induced nutrient depletions. So just kind of addressing those as a first kind of thing to do is really important with a lot of HIV positive individuals and any person on lifelong drug interventions. And then with a lot of these patients, or, you know, pretty much anyone with HIV, the virus itself kind of changes the epithelium of your gastrointestinal tract and makes it more, you know, prone to injury, and you kind of have this perpetual leaky gut situation. So, and this is well documented, it's the dysbiosis that comes alongside with HIV. So my approach with every single patient, everyone is different because they have different comorbidities, different situations, different eating habits, but as a general rule, addressing the gut is really important for those patients. And just kind of giving support for someone who will have a perpetual leaky gut, and understanding that, you know, most of your immune system resides in the gut. So if you can get the gut to a good place and kind of like a constant, like, better threshold, I've seen CD4 count, which is the immune cells that are really harmed with HIV. They really can get elevated with that approach. You can really improve CD4 count. And that really is a big deal for the immune system of HIV positive individuals, because they're less susceptible to, you know, secondary infections, which HIV kind of makes you susceptible to. So that's my biggest approach. And then also antioxidant defenses, because as with any virus, you know, your body's working overtime and draining antioxidant resources. And if you think about the inflammation as a fire, you really want to support the water, which is the antioxidants, to put that out. So high antioxidant intake, whether it be through diet and supplements, is best in my opinion. And really addressing the gut can make a significant difference in the immune system of these individuals.
And let's talk more about gut health, because, you know, HIV aside, I mean, everyone can benefit from a healthy gut. And I think you said it, that you know, most of our immune system starts with our microbiome, starts with inside of our gut. So I mean, what should just the average person be doing to really improve their gut health? And is there any testing they should get to see exactly what they should be taking or what type of foods they should be eating?
So there is testing available, but the microbiome is a very complex thing, and it's constantly changing. So I tend to kind of approach gut problems like I do the protocol first and the microbiome mapping afterwards, because it's just so variable. But there are things in general that you can do to support your gut health. And the biggest thing that I harp on all the time is pesticide use. So when you consume pesticides every day, which are in everything, I mean, it's contaminated in our drinking water, it's in, you know, the grass you walk on, it's in our face care products, it's in our food. And glyphosate, which is one of the most common ones, the whole argument from Monsanto is that, well, it doesn't harm human cells. It only harms cells with this one pathway, the shikimate pathway, and it kills them, but it doesn't kill human cells. But what does have the shikimate pathway is every microbe in your gut microbiome. So every time you're exposed to any kind of glyphosate pesticide, you're devastating your human microbiome. And your microbiome, you know, helps you make neurotransmitters, helps you with metabolic health, helps you make nutrients. So I think having, you know, making an effort to eat organic foods, natural products is one of the biggest things that you can do for your gut microbiome. You can further proliferate your gut microbiome by eating a really dense, nutrient-dense, diverse diet, like grabbing foods you wouldn't normally buy. Like, you don't know what that fruit is? Buy it. Eat it. Do it a couple times a week. It'll proliferate all the good guys. You know, eating sources of probiotic foods like sauerkraut, you know, kimchi, whatever it is, and then prebiotic foods like asparagus, leeks, chicory, whatever it may be. All those things help. But if you're going to be drinking alcohol, eating tons of sugar, and eating lots of pesticide-ridden foods, you know, you're going to have a hard time maintaining a healthy gut microbiome. So I think that removing the bad guys first is the first step, in my opinion.
Good advice. Get rid of the bad guys and more of the good guys. So I think that's advice for everyone. So those are some great ideas for people to look more into if you're not getting enough of those types of foods. That you know, put the French fries down and grab some more fruit and some of those good foods that you mentioned there. That's awesome. So you were talking about some pathways earlier, and you were talking about it in a negative sense in terms of these chemicals, but also there's pathways in our body that we can activate through nutrition to directly affect some of our DNA. For example, NRF2 I know is one that you and I had talked about before. Can you describe for our listeners just how do these pathways work in the body? And we're so immersed in drug companies telling us that we need a drug to activate something in our body to affect our DNA. But as we talked about before, we can do something similar using nutrition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the NRF2 pathway and NRF1 are really interesting pathways because they basically control these proteins that increase your antioxidant production. So the NRF2 in particular, when it's activated, basically makes your body make its internal antioxidants. An example that I think most people know is glutathione. So it really increases your glutathione production pretty significantly, which means you're better equipped to deal with infections, inflammation, any insult. So this can be influenced through many different nutritional pathways. I think my favorite thing to use to kind of encourage that pathway is sulforaphane, which is really abundant in broccoli sprouts. So I always tell people, get ground up broccoli sprouts, do a couple teaspoons a day, and you're just pushing that pathway. It's a really important pathway for just anti-aging too, because as you age, you become more inflamed. It's harder for your body to regenerate. And so pushing that pathway can really help quench those free radicals causing the inflammation. And if you're doing just like general interventions, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, all those yummy guys, they contain the sulforaphane antioxidant, but then many other foods have it too, and like curcumin, resveratrol. Mm-hmm. So you can take a significant amount of, I guess, supplement interventions to kind of increase that pathway. And it is really important for any person struggling with any kind of inflammatory issue. So it's a powerful pathway to kind of address.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, it's more good news, I think, for our listeners that it just reinforces the idea we talked about before, where you do have control over, your DNA and producing these good enzymes, these good proteins inside of your body. And we don't need chemicals to do it. We don't need a drug to do that. We can do that through nutrition. And it's going back to, a couple thousand years, right? Going back to how things were used medicinally hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And it's worked before. And so I think we've come full circle now with a lot of information, and a lot of this is still emerging. We're actually are figuring out why these foods are good for us and exactly what's going on in our DNA. So that's awesome stuff. And
I don't know about you, but I don't know any drugs that will turn on your NRF2 pathway.
And that's where the drug companies are behind nutrition here. And so I'd rather do it through food. I'm sure most people would. Everybody's DNA is different, and so drugs may or may not be effective with people. Whereas we know that good food and good nutrition is always effective. So that's awesome stuff. Well, we're about out of time, but I want to definitely thank you, Dr. Bay, for joining us on Nutrigenomics today. So our guest has been Dr. Kelly Bay out of New York, who is a doctor of chiropractic, and also she's a nutrition specialist and certified dietitian, nutritionist as well. And she is award-winning with the work she's doing there with HIV patients, which I find just absolutely fascinating. So thank you again, Dr. Bay.
Thanks for having me. It was great hanging out and talking about all this cool stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you take care.